Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's PRCA Trends event for 2023. My name's Koray Kamgoz. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing at the PRCA. Very pleased to be here with you all. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're trying to do here, this is an event we run annually, looking at the topics, issues, and trends which communications professionals need to be mindful of in the year ahead. And really delighted today to be joined by 4 different panelists from different parts of the industry who be sharing their thoughts on the key issues that we all need to keep front of mind as we plan ahead for 2023. So a quick bit of housekeeping before we get started. We'd love this session to be as interactive as possible, so do feel free to ask questions throughout using the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Please try to use the Q&A box rather than the chat function, because it just allows us to work our way through as many of the questions as we can. Also, a quick note to say this session is being recorded, so do bear that in mind for any of your contributions. And also, if you have any colleagues or friends who you think would like to benefit from hearing what we're discussing today, do feel free to share the link with them at a later stage. It should be going live in our YouTube page in the next couple of days, so do look out for that. Cool. Well, without further ado, we'll get straight into it, and we're going to be kicking off today with our first panelist, which is Paul Sutton, who is a social and digital media consultant. And Paul's going to be talking about the key trends which he believes are going to be defining 2023. So Paul, without further ado, I will hand over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've had to think about this kind of broadly, because digital obviously covers a lot of different areas. But there are 3 or 4 things that kind of stand out for me of what people should be looking at over the next sort of 12 months or so. The first one of them is AI, and this has been on the agenda for so long that it's almost boring to hear it talked about. But I think there have been such massive strides made in the last couple of months that it's something that now is going to become pressing in the last 12 months. When I think about I think it was 2018, the CIPR AI and PR group did a study around the impact of AI on the public relations industry. And at that time, it said, well, in 5 years, there's going to be a massive impact. Now, that never really happened. Over the last sort of time since then, there's not been a great deal of change. But then back in November, at the end of November, ChatGPT launched, which you may or may not have had a play with. Within a week, it had 1 million users. And it's now closed to new registrants at the moment. So if you haven't got a registration at the moment, you can't get one, but that's because it's up to capacity at the moment. I'm sure that'll come back. At the time that launched, in the industry, there was a lot of fuss around is it just a gimmick? You know, this will never impact our industry. Robots can't write like people do, all this sort of stuff going on. All I can say is this is not a gimmick. This is really, honestly, the start of something big. Microsoft has invested in OpenAI, which is the company that runs ChatGPT. And it spoke about at the World Economic Forum over the last few days. Now, what it is, in case you're not aware of it, is basically a generative learning model. So the more you feed this thing, the more it's going to learn. And that will create exponential growth in the intelligence and capabilities of this platform. Now, the way it works is you feed it a prompt and it will come back to you with an answer. Now, that can be used in all sorts of different ways, which I don't think anyone's really got their head around yet, but it can be used for analysis of content, for example. It can be used for helping with copywriting in different styles, which is a major impact for me on the PR industry. It can be used for research purposes, so either to enhance or compete with Google, you could argue. You could use it to suggest content plans. You could use it to create social media posts. You could use it for, I don't know, crisis messaging. The way to think of it is it's an advisor. This isn't a copywriting platform. It's an advisor to you. So as a PR professional, there is now something out there which You can ignore it and say it's a gimmick and let it go away. It will not. The best way to think about this is not be threatened by it, not think this is going to take my job, because I agree to an extent that there are things, even copywriting, there to an extent you can say, well, it can't do that yet. But the question is, or the most relevant word is yet. It will be able to do this stuff. So my advice to everyone is, when you can get access, if you don't have access already, start playing with it, get used to it. A lot of the way to use this is about the way you prompt it. It's an AI system. If you don't prompt it in the right way, it's not going to give you the right answer. So this is something that can help you so much over the next coming years. And the key for me, like I said, is the prompting. Learn how to use this, learn how to prompt it effectively, because the better you get at that, the more helpful it's going to be in your job roles going forward over the next couple of years. So, I mean, that is kind of my big thing for the next 12 months. And if we'd have done this in October, I would not have said AI. But that's the power of this thing. This is just going to turn things upside down, and I honestly believe that. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I've noticed a lot in the last probably 12 to 18 months, and I think is going to bleed through even more this year, is around digital advertising. And the impact of this, people have different impressions of how this impacts PR, really, because what's happened with digital advertising is that there's the deprecation of third-party cookies by Google. We had a lot of security and privacy data things with Apple and iOS updating traceability and trackability on iOS devices. That has had a massive impact on advertising. Specifically at the moment, it's been relatively limited to Meta. But if anyone on this webinar runs boosted posts or advertising accounts for their campaigns, they will have seen this in action. The results you get from Meta nowadays are nowhere near the way they used to be. You can still spend as much money as you like on it. You can generate impressions, you can generate clicks. Do they convert into what you want them to do? That's the dodgy bit that's going on now. And this, like I said, at the moment, this impacts largely Meta, so Instagram and Facebook. That is going to go out to other platforms in the next 12 months. It's going to affect display advertising. It's going to affect Google. Anything to do with any sort of conversion is coming under fire, coming under a lot of scrutiny. I mean, I have clients who I run paid advertising campaigns for, and we've increasingly moved away from Meta because I just can't get the results that I used to be able to get. These platforms cannot track users the way they used to. They can't track behaviors and interests. Anything like that is going. They can't even track really sort of retargeting, because they can't track devices that people are being retargeted on. So if advertisers are losing their power to do something, does it open up an opportunity for PR people? That's my question. I don't have an answer for that because it needs thought. But I would argue that there are other ways that companies should be thinking about spending their money that don't rely on just putting money in advertising nowadays. Another thing that I think is working its way through and is going to become more prevalent in the next 12 months is the behavior of social media channels and the way people are using them. And this relates specifically, I think, to TikTok. I've got some stats in front of me. So there are now 9.2 million monthly UK users of TikTok, which is up 30% in just 12 months. Now, we all know that TikTok's gone through the roof since the pandemic, but that just shows there is no signs of this thing slowing down. People use it for an average of 41 minutes a day. So once you're on it, the algorithm is so good at showing you what it thinks you want to see that it keeps you on it. The stickability of this site is amazing. You may have seen just recently quite aggressive TV advertising. Now, TikTok is making big strides and investing in TV advertising it does two things. Firstly, there are some ads that are reassuring users about privacy and the way their kids are using it. It's aimed very much at parents and that sort of level. And there are other ads that are trying to appeal to older age groups and pull older users into the app, because it's going to reach saturation among a younger user group very soon. And that happens with all of these digital platforms. The younger age groups tend to use them faster, and then the older age groups come in. That's happening with TikTok now. So it's trying to reposition itself a bit into a more secure, more informative, almost a search engine as much as anything these ads are pushing it as. Now, the big question I have is around data privacy. And I think it's going to face some pretty big issues in the next 12 months. It's escaped so far. I'm not sure why, when Facebook gets hammered all the time over this, but even my daughter, who's 13, came home from school this week and said, I'm taking TikTok off my phone. I said, well, why is that? And she said, it's because it sucks all my data, it tracks me too much, which I found really interesting, because she would be the prime user of a TikTok account, really. But if questions are like that are going to start to be asked among the young user age groups, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I suppose the wider perspective on it is, people are using social media in different ways now. People aren't posting so much. Like Facebook, I'm not going to say it's dying because that's ridiculous, but people don't use Facebook in the same way. Even Instagram, I think, is peaked. If I were to take a guess, I can't see it growing much more. I could see it perhaps sliding over the next 12 months. Twitter's been static for God knows how many years, and Musk sees intent on totally breaking it, if you ask me. The only one that's starting to really kind of move is LinkedIn, but that's a different use case. It's very much a business use case. So I think people's behavior around social media is changing. That impacts the way brands must use it and the way they can use it for marketing and communication purposes. And I think it's going to be an interesting environment to watch. You can't afford to just think things are going to stay the same in this area over the next 12 months. They're not, because people are using things differently. Even if I look at podcasting, for example, which has been a trend now, again, for 3 or 4 years, podcasts are still growing. There's still a user base there that is growing and growing and growing. And people are starting to take on podcasts for digital advertising, for example. So maybe some of the spend from, I don't know, Meta is going to go on podcast advertising. It's going to be an interesting area. But more and more people are still listening to podcasts, for example. So user behavior is the other big thing. AI, number one. Secondly, advertising and the impact that the declining that is going to have on PR. And the third one is changing user behaviors, which I think we have to keep a very close eye on. So they're my kind of big 3 things to keep an eye on in the next 12 months or so.
That's excellent, Paul. Thanks so much for that. That was fascinating. I love what you said there at the end about the changing habits of the way we use social media. I think it's a really good point. And when we think back, I don't want to say the old days, but when social media was in its infancy, the social element was principal. You had to contribute to it, and it was a two-way conversation. But when you look at the dominant platform now, particularly TikTok, I mean, by all accounts, it's a broadcast platform rather than a social platform. So it's fascinating to see this shift. And yeah, it's one that comms professionals need to be mindful of. Also loved your covering off the ChatGPT as well. I've had a play around with that over the last few days. It's pretty frightening, to be honest with you.
I agree.
When you of course it's got its limitations, and there's a limit to the amount of information it's captured. I think it's till 2021, but I mean, it's frightening when you ask it to pitch ideas for a campaign or draft 5 tweets or Facebook posts. It's incredibly exciting.
And you see, it's 6 or 7 weeks old, that thing, and it will be iterative. It's going to get better and better and better, and it will grow exponentially. That knowledge it's got. This isn't a linear model. This is an exponential growth on it.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm sure we're going to have lots more questions on that at the end, and we're going to come to questions at the end. If you did have anything else you want to put to Paul, please do pop it in the Q&A box. I think we just had one which was relating to the channel, but it was ChatGPT, which we were speaking about. But do pop any other questions you've got in the Q&A box. We'll move on to the next speaker. So very pleased to introduce Rebecca Zeitlin from Levidian. Rebecca is also the co-chair of the PRCA's climate group, and she's going to be talking to us about climate communication. So Rebecca, it's over to you.
Thanks, Cry, and good afternoon, everybody. I also have three things, and I'm going to start at the thing that's probably relevant to the biggest number of you, which is increasing scrutiny on green claims. So we will have seen this, if you've been paying attention over the last couple of years, you'll have seen everything from advertising standards going after people making green claims through to civil lawsuits in Europe about KLM's claims and any number of other things. I think that was just a very, very beginning of what's going to be an increasingly aggressive pursuit of green claims. And I think it's really important to bear in mind that there's not the regulations themselves are not especially well defined, in part because what are we trying to prevent? What, at the end of the day, we want to block greenwashing, right? That's the thing we want to get against, but it's arguable how we define greenwashing in the first place. So I think over the next 12 months, you'll see an increasing number of cases, which will help to define what the rules actually are. And we'll see more countries putting in place guidance and then regulation that will address things like green claims. And I think that sort of spills over into other areas as well. So I don't know how many of you read The Guardian yesterday and the piece about Verra and voluntary carbon markets and whether their anti-deforestation projects are actually real and actually preventing CO2 emissions. That's just one of about 1 million examples of that exact problem that are going to come out over the coming months. Voluntary carbon markets in general are going to come under increasing scrutiny, in part as governments are trying to regulate carbon markets. And we're seeing more and more moves in that direction, both in the UK and abroad. So I think what has been sort of a companies doing what companies like to do thing to date is not going to be that way in future. Why does that matter for comms people? Well, a lot of times we are communicating things that we may not technically understand, right? That's the nature of what we do, but it's our problem if we are going counter to something like ASA guidance, right? So we have to be really conscious of what the guidance says, and we have to be willing to challenge internally when we're asked to communicate about something that smells a little funny. I know I've said this in panels before. If you think something feels weird, don't do it without asking some questions first, because it probably is weird, right? It's worth exploring that feeling you get. And that goes both on things like owned communications and advertising as well. It's also in how you engage with organizations like the Verras of this world. Lots of companies are making net zero commitments, and most of them are having to do some form of offsetting to achieve what they've set out as their goal. Offsetting should never be your first choice. Offsetting is the choice of no alternative, right? And if you are going to do offsets, you have to really deeply evaluate what they actually are, how they're being calculated, how they're being verified. And Verra has been held up as the gold standard, by the way. So this is not a cowboy outfit doing something and getting caught for it. This is the gold standard getting called on it. So that's thing number one, and it sort of leads neatly on to regulation more broadly. Not everyone on this call will work for a listed business, but anybody who does work for a listed business will be well aware of the regulatory structures that force climate reporting. In the UK, we have some TCFD aligned reporting requirements already. The US is going to roll out similar things. The SEC is exploring the same approach. And in Europe, we have the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that came in like 2 weeks ago that will roll up to the first reporting, I think, is in 25. And that is extraordinarily robust. If you've not read what's included in that, it's a pretty massive workload for reporting teams. And there's going to be some more stuff that comes out in the EU that's under consultation currently. So obviously, for those of you who work in listed businesses, that is immediate mission that you have to match those reporting requirements. If you're in a scale-up business like me, or a business that might want to list, don't forget that that's going to become your way of working when you list. Just because you're VC backed and you can do what you like now and you're a unicorn and woohoo, that's all great. When you list, the rules do apply to you. And it's much easier to follow them to some extent from the beginning rather than at the end. So it's well worth taking a look at what regulations would apply to your business. It's also good practice to do similar things, no matter whether you plan to be listed or not, right? Those regulations are there for a reason. And then the last thing, which is probably a bit vague for a call like this, but legislation in nation is driving international conflict, right? We see what has happened with the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States and the immediate, oh no, there's a WTO claim to be made, right? And now the EU is bringing in things and Repower EU, and the UK is going to have to do something because there's tax benefits. While on the surface, that doesn't seem like a comms issue, it is, because regulation is going to change really quickly, because world trade is a primary driver of pretty much everything that happens in politics, right? So we will see that influencing things like how lobbying happens and who's trying to achieve what. Lots of new policy will be available for influence. So those of you who work in that space, it will get more interesting rather than less. Not like it could get any more interesting than has been in this country, certainly, but that's a different conversation. But it's worth keeping in mind what that means over the long term, because there are opportunities for businesses, whether that's tax benefit or otherwise, for decarbonizing. And that will mean that your employer will be looking for ways to capitalize on that. And we come right back to where we started, which is, how do we make ourselves look really good? And how do we put in place some policies that might get us access to these financial benefits? And that's where we come in again to say, hold on a minute. Is that real? Is that what we're actually trying to achieve? And how do we communicate that in a way that's not going to fall foul of regulators? So those are my three things. Basically, regulation, regulation, and regulation. It's delightful.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Rebecca. That was really, really interesting and very, very useful. I think one thing that you mentioned about communications professionals being used to articulate and share content on issues that they might not necessarily be familiar with, but from what you're saying, there's the intensity of the scrutiny. People need to invest the time and effort to take a deep, or to broaden their expertise in these areas, so that they're able to advise businesses.
And also just we have to be skeptical, and it's a lot of the things that are going to fall foul, particularly on greenwashing claims, right, are not going to be things with intent. It's going to be vague claims that are going to start getting called every single time, right? So if you just say it's greener than the other guys and you can't back that up with proof, you're going to get called up, right? And that's not because you're trying to do anything wrong. It's just somebody's told you that it is. And if you don't go away and try and figure out how and why and to what extent, you're going to fall foul of regulators now, which is different than it was a couple of years ago.
Very helpful to know. And we'll come on to questions at the end, but just last point from me, there's so much information here to soak up for communications professionals. Where would you recommend members and others in the industry going to learn more about these issues, so that they can try and absorb as much of the regulation information as possible?
I think obviously the first place I will say is to keep an eye on the climate working group, because we are putting out a number of resources and we have a number of events coming up as well. And if there are things you want to know about, ask me, ask Laura Sutherland, the other co-chair, and any of the members of the working group, because we want to make sure that we're producing materials that are useful to you. That would be the first place I would recommend for members and non-members alike. And also go directly to the regulators and read the regulation as it comes from them, whether that's the ASA here in the UK or any number of other bodies elsewhere in the world. Happy to help signpost that. My door is always open on Twitter or Mastodon. If you have fled Twitter, I am my name everywhere. So please do just reach out and we'll try and signpost you to the right places.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Rebecca. Okay, cool. Moving on to our next talk, we're very pleased to be joined by Sheeraz Gulsher, who recently joined Sky, but who also is the co-founder of an incredible industry movement named People Like Us. And Sheeraz is going to be sharing his perspectives on inclusion and some things that we need to be considering for 2023. So Sheeraz, it's over to you.
Thank you, mate. And hi, everyone. Really pleased to be here. So as Corey says, I'll touch on three trends, like Rebecca and Paul, from an inclusivity and pay equity point of view. Just for the context, if you haven't heard of us, People Like Us exists solely to support comms professionals and journalists from Black, Asian, mixed race, and minority ethnic backgrounds. And looking forward to telling you a little more. So the three trends, the first one is a super topical one, the impact the cost of living crisis is having on comms and what some of the best practices are. And to paint a bit of a picture, we know rising costs continue to have profound impacts on the comms industry. Recent research has shown that a quarter of media and marketing professionals say they'll need to move back in with family to manage costs. 40% are skipping meals during the week to save some money. And over half feel despair about rising costs and do not know where to turn. I'm sure you'll agree, this is all pretty staggering on so many levels. But in fact, to make matters worse, the study also looked at workers from racially diverse backgrounds, and it found that they're being disproportionately impacted in terms of more likely to be borrowing money, moving back in with family, and spending less on meals despite costs being significantly higher. And I suppose even with an increased focus on D&I in the last 3 years, less than half of media marketing professionals in this survey felt diversity is a priority for their organization's leadership team. And I feel businesses really should be learning, particularly after widespread criticism of virtue signaling we all saw from brands and businesses following the murder of George Floyd. I suppose workers now want to see tangible change. I want to see organizations put their money where their mouth is. And I suppose on the flip side, what I'm seeing quite a lot of recently, which is really welcome news, is that agencies and brands are really supporting teams, either with one-off payments to help them navigate through rising costs, or even bumping up salaries altogether. Some of you may have seen an article in PR Week recently, a cracking agency called the Romans, who have increased salary of all staff in line with inflation, which is truly wonderful to see. And at the start of the new year, I saw quite a few companies share posts about what they're doing to support staff, and this is awesome, and I hope to see this continue as a trend this year. So the second point I'll touch on is all around pay transparency. So the ethnicity pay gap is going to continue to be a hot topic this year in absolutely all sectors, as the pressure on the government mounts to finally introduce new legislation around introducing the ethnicity pay gap reporting, like we do for the gender pay gap. And this is from a variety of campaigns, including ours, people like us, the TUC, the Human Rights Commission, and to be honest, most political parties are pushing for this. It seems to be the sensible and the right thing to do. And we think it's an important step to determine where the disparities are in your organization, and it allows you to create really clear frameworks to address them. And I think there's a lot to be said about being held to account publicly. So I'd encourage anyone on this call to speak to your leadership, speak to HR about starting this kind of reporting. And for those of you that are at agencies or have one reporting into you, you might have seen our project we do every year with PR Week. So do it, enter and submit your gender and ethnicity pay gap data, and I'm confident your staff will appreciate it. I suppose just the final point on this is increasing diversity in an organization and paying fairly isn't just the right thing to do. Comms teams with diverse staff have a much better understanding and insights into like nuanced audiences we really aim to tap into. They have lived experiences that perhaps none of us know nothing about. I think it's much better for creativity, innovation, and it makes much better teams. I suppose the risk is if we don't do this is PR will keep falling out of touch. And I suppose we'll only really create campaigns that only other people in the media and PR industry will notice. And I think it's just a bit of a waste of time. And finally, I'll touch quickly on aggressive hiring, particularly at the senior level. The past couple of years, we've seen a huge amount of movement, which looks like it's probably finally starting to settle down. Some sectors are booming, so agencies and brands are looking for staff, particularly at the senior levels. We have lots of companies getting in touch with us, trying to find talent from a breadth of backgrounds at the very top levels. And just to say, I think the challenge some smaller brands and agencies might have is larger competitors trying to poach staff with bigger paychecks. But I'm a firm believer that if you look after staff, pay them properly and competitively, and I suppose providing really clear pathways on their progression, then you don't really need to worry about this too much. So I suppose to summarize my 3 points on trends we're seeing and what we'd like to see more this year is tangible support for staff. I think authenticity is super important. Everyone now sees through bullshit virtue signaling. So you need to put your money where your mouth is, as demand for staff is massive. Transparency is super key in how people are paid. I'd suggest doing it now and get ahead of the curve, ahead of this legislation arriving anyway. And don't be afraid if you haven't got it right. I think it's really important to have that snapshot and start creating frameworks to addressing it. And just as an aside, if you are advertising for roles, please share salary bands, otherwise you're wasting everyone's time. And finally, just to point on aggressive hiring, I think, yeah, I don't think smaller firms need to worry too much. If you've got a great working environment and look after your team, I think you'll be all good. And that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Sheeraz. There's packed so much into that. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. I think the so much of when we speak to members about what they're doing across diversity, equity, and inclusion, it can be such a daunting prospect to try and a lot of organizations really not knowing where to start. But I think what you've done, the support of the community and spotlighting the importance of the ethnicity pay gap, is provide a bit of a roadmap for how people can engage with this from a productive point of view, because pay is something that we all have in common. We all go to work to be paid, and we need to get to a point where, as an industry, we're actively spotlighting and addressing ethnicity pay gap. So firstly, just a massive thank you for everything that you've done on this. And there's also been a petition that you've put forward to Parliament as well recently. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we kicked this off a month or two ago, essentially encouraging the government to take those final steps. Because across all parties, people have called for this. The Equalities Committee, Labour, even, so many MPs across all parties. We think it's just the right and sensible step to do. So if it's all right with you, I'll pop the link in the chat. So if anyone feels like it's something they can get behind, please do sign it, share it with friends and family, and do hold people to account. I think it takes 30 seconds to, and I think it could have profound impact on the lives of workers from a breadth of backgrounds.
100%. Yeah, please do drop it in the chat, and we'd ask that everyone read that and do complete that if you can. Just last point on ethnicity pay gap. You mentioned the gender pay gap before, and the fact that our industry and the business community has already gone through this process of where some organizations were already reporting their gender pay gap, others weren't, and now organizations of a certain size are compelled to by law. But for so many reasons, it makes sense to get ahead of that and not to wait until the legislation is in place, not least so you can build the kind of culture that you want to see within your organization. And I presume that's something that you are fully supportive of.
100%. I think it's really important to do this now, despite the size of your business. I think by law, the gender pay gap, you have a company size of 250 plus, but which I think probably needs to be lower by law. But I think what we're seeing is lots of PR companies do this voluntarily, which is amazing to see. I'm seeing small and mid-sized businesses really lead the way. So the project we lead with PR Week every year invites agencies to do just that. And I suppose what's really interesting is what we haven't seen much of is large agencies enter, and we hope like that changes this year. It's an immensely useful exercise, and you can see the agencies that have entered for 2 years running that they've either closed or remained level year on year of their ethnicity pay gap and the gender pay gap. So it's immensely useful. I'll pop some links in the chat if you're keen to get in the mix.
Brilliant. And just a last point on that, the PRCA's Race and Ethnicity Equity Board actually has a guide for communications businesses on how to identify and reduce your ethnicity pay gap. So I can pop the link to that guidance in the chat as well. So do check that out too. Cool, Sheeraz, thanks so much for that. That was brilliant. Moving on now to our final segment, which is going to be focusing on recruitment, and we're really pleased to be joined by Neil Grant from Reuben Sinclair. So Neil's going to be running through a few of the key trends from a recruitment and talent point of view. So Neil, it's over to you.
Lovely, thanks Corey. Hey everyone, great to be here. As Corey mentioned, I'm a senior member of the team at Reuben Sinclair. We're a specialist PR and comms and marketing recruitment consultancy. So I'm going to discuss 5 key recruitment trends / hot topics that we're currently seeing in the market, and then specifically how candidate expectations are shifting in relation to these trends. So despite challenging macroeconomic headwinds, I'm sure we're all aware of, the PR jobs market does remain very buoyant. As we kick off 2023, it is still very much a candidate-driven market. So the first trend and topic I want to discuss is salary growth. So across the whole of 2022, the PR jobs market was weighted very much in favour of candidates due to the, as I say, the supply and demand imbalance. In other words, a lack of candidates relative to the number of open roles, or lack of available candidates. As a result, we saw salary inflation of circa 8 to 10% on average, and that was from entry level all the way up to kind of mid to senior level, and across most sectors within PR. So this level of salary growth, the 8 to 10% on average, indicates that the PR industry is ahead of wider wage growth in the economy, which the ONS reported grew at an annual rate of 5.4% in the June to August 2022 period. So this talent shortage that we've been seeing, combined with other factors such as the cost of living crisis, are key factors behind this inflation of salaries that we're continuing to see in the market. For as long as this remains to be the market dynamic, I think salary expectations of PR jobs candidates will be raised compared to previous levels. Candidates we're seeing, they are seeking offers and salary increases, as Sheeraz mentioned, internally with their current employers, as well as externally if they're in the market, that they feel are aligned with their perceived value in the current market, as well as with current industry benchmarks and inflation of salaries more broadly. So segueing from there, another trend we're seeing is faster progression. So in addition to salary inflation, we're seeing people move more quickly through levels of seniority within agencies, within companies. That's a result of employers who are looking to, I guess, retain talent and also secure the best talent in this talent short market. For example, we've been seeing people promoted to account manager roles in agencies who only have maybe around 1.5 years experience, whereas previously, if you rewind a couple of years, an account manager would typically have required minimum kind of 3 years experience before going into that role. So we're seeing people move up a lot quicker, progress through the ranks a lot quicker. And as I say, it's multiple factors at play, but I think, employers who are keen to retain their talent are also fast-tracking people, preemptively promoting team members, counter offers as well that are including promotions we're seeing, and essentially people being fast-tracked through the ranks in order to, I guess, retain them and keep hold of the best people. I'd say particularly at the mid and senior levels of seniority, AM to kind of SAD levels within an agency. So the mid and senior levels, a lot of employers are making offers to candidates that offer them a step up rather than a lateral move, again, in a bid to beat the competition for the best talent. So all of this means that a lot of candidates are now kind of in the market expecting faster career development, faster progression with their existing employer, as they know that if that doesn't materialize, they'll likely be able to expedite their progression by looking externally for new opportunities. Less candidates are open to moving for sideways lateral moves. And even people we're seeing who, haven't been in their current role for too long, they're only looking for new roles externally at a more senior level of seniority. So moving on, so the third trend and topic I want to talk about is flexibility. So as the dust has settled from the pandemic-induced sudden shift to remote working, we're now kind of seeing a divergence of approaches when it comes to flexible and remote working. So some employers are going one way, embracing a fully remote first, fully flexible approach, whilst others are now kind of going the other way and demanding that staff work in the office for a fixed number of days per week or set days. Within the candidate market, there's a lot of demand for genuinely flexible working options. I think candidate expectations have really now shifted, and there's a lot more emphasis on being able to balance personal priorities in personal life with work commitments. We're also seeing an increasing number of candidates who have preference for 4-day per week roles. Again, could be a number of factors that are behind that. People from different stages of their life, different situations. There's also definitely an increase in movement for the 4-day week. So I think some employers are starting to look at that more broadly, thinking, okay, how can we work that? Is it something we're going to do? Certainly from candidates, so we're talking to a lot of people who are keen on 4-day per week roles. So I think that's something that's going to continue as we go through this year in terms of candidate preference and expectation there. In short, I think employers who are embracing radical levels of flexibility are likely to have a clear advantage when it comes to both retention and also securing new talent. So moving on to the next area I want to talk about is equality, diversity and inclusion, I suppose from a recruitment and talent perspective. and how candidate expectations are, again, shifting around this. So diversity continues to be a key issue within the industry. More and more employers and clients we're speaking to are looking to embed ED&I frameworks and processes into their overall recruitment and hiring processes. We're seeing, employers historically with narrow, closed job specs tend to compete for minority talent in an ever decreasing talent pool, whereas organizations who are more open and flexible with their job specs, hiring based on values predominantly, have greater access to minority talent. From the candidate's perspective, more and more candidates we're speaking to are asking to see the ED&I policies, so diversity and inclusion policies of prospective employers. Candidates are also analysing the diversity of prospective employers, and if they feel diversity is lacking, they want to understand what's being done internally about this, which is great. So candidates are a lot more aware. They're asking for meaningful and specific ED&I policies that incorporate actions rather than vague and generic statements. And then finally, I want to talk about EVP, so employee value proposition, purpose and value alignment, again, from a talent recruitment perspective. So we're seeing greater emphasis on the need for employers to have a clear and human employee value proposition. So I've talked about the salary, the progression, etc. So these things are still, as I say, very important to retaining and securing talent. But it's no longer enough to rely on these traditional levers like salary, progression, job title to secure and retain the best talent. These things are still important, as I say, but candidate expectations have shifted. Candidates are looking for more broad value alignment and purpose in their roles as well. So employees want to be seen as people. They want to work for employers whose values align with theirs. Candidates increasingly want greater levels of purpose in their role, meaning and purpose. They want to be, a lot of people we speak to want to be driving positive social impact, positive environmental impact. So they're looking at, the brands, the clients they'd be working on. They're looking at the values of the organization as a whole, how that organization operates internally. So it's key for employers to humanize their EVP, understand their employee personas, build deeper connections with their employees and communities, essentially. So those are the 5 key trends from a recruitment and talent perspective I wanted to talk about as we head into 2023.
Great, thanks very much for that, Neil. That was really interesting. And I'm glad you touched on a couple of the points that Sheeraz picked up on as well. He was making the point or the need for organisations to include salary bandings in the job. I guess there's a frustration amongst candidates, particularly when it's a candidate-led market, as you say, that sometimes there isn't that transparency. Is that something you advocate for and encourage businesses to do?
Totally, yeah, totally. I think it should always be transparent, both externally and internally within organisations. So definitely, in terms of job adverts, there should be full transparency around the pay level.
And in terms of, you mentioned employee value proposition, and like one good example of things have turned around is that at the PRCA we used to do job of the week as part of our newsletter. So we've got our newsletter which goes out every Monday, and it's now switched. We do candidates a week because the entire spectrum was kind of turned on its head. What would you say is the one thing, if you could pick out one identifiable thing that businesses should be doing to attract the candidates that they so desperately seek?
Yeah, as I say, I think it's about having a really well-defined employee value proposition. What are the candidates, what are the employees going to be getting in return for their hard work and their skills? So beyond the financial package, beyond the kind of typical benefits, what else can they contribute to? What else can they be involved in? What are the broader things that the organization can offer around flexibility, around positive impact work, around purpose? So it's just having a very well defined and human EVP that's very clear, so that prospective employees will know what they'll be getting from that organization. Is it going to align with their values? And what will they essentially be getting in return for their commitment and skills?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Benefits beyond duvet days and
exactly. Yeah, hot water and fruit. Yeah.
We'll take central heating now as well. Probably.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, it's hard to believe we've completely raced through our time slot. So I think, all that's really left for me to do is to say a massive thank you, really, to Neil, Paul, Sheeraz, and Rebecca. Hope everyone who's joined has found it useful. I certainly have. And we'll be looking forward to sharing the outputs of this on our YouTube channel. Thanks for the comments coming in from a few of our attendees at the moment. But yeah, as I said, this will be out in the next couple of days on our YouTube channel. So if you do have any colleagues or friends who you think would be interested in hearing from our panelists, please do feel free to share the link. Other than that, again, massive thank you to our panel, and thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you again at an event very soon. Thanks very much, everyone.